All right. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Building Applications in the Cloud. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Anil Sabharwal. I'm a product manager at Google for the Documents List API.
And I'm Bidelman. I work as an engineer on the Documents List API.
So over the next 45 minutes to an hour, we have a pretty exciting session for you. It's pretty jam-packed. We're going to try to have a nice balance between looking at some really cool demonstrations as well as doing a bit of a deep dive into some actual code samples. So we'll give you the best of both worlds. We're also excited today to have a couple of partners with us. We have Sandosh from GDocsBar and Ondrej from Syncplicity, a couple of partners that use the Google Data APIs that'll be here to talk to you a little bit about some of the applications they have and some exciting releases that they have coming. You'll also note here just at the bottom, we are using Google Moderator for this presentation. For those of you who haven't used Moderator before, you can just go to that link there, the bit.ly io-cloud-apps, and you can actually just sign in and you can put in a question there and people can vote. And at the end of the session, we'll have Q&A for about 10 to 15 minutes. You're more than welcome to come up to the microphone here and ask the question live, or of course we'll look at Moderator and ask the question or answer the questions that appear on Moderator. All right, so let's get started. So let's do a quick poll. How many people here have built an application using one of the many Google Data APIs? Great, excellent. And how many of you are familiar specifically with the Google Documents List API? Okay, great, brilliant. So the majority of you have interacted with the Google Data APIs, and a small group of you have also seen the Documents List API. Great. So today, basically, what we wanted to talk about a little bit is where we've been and kind of where we're going, and the opportunity around building applications in the cloud. And I'll talk about that in a second. But one of the things that I know Eric and I love about Google, and many of you have probably noticed, is the pace of innovation. So if we look at this API as just an example, the Google Documents List API, a year ago, there wasn't truthfully a lot that you could do. We provided some basic use cases around being able to download being able to actually retrieve a list of documents. We had a limited query model that allowed you to be able to find out, find a document that matched the title or be able to look for a particular spreadsheet. We allowed you to upload documents, presentations, and spreadsheets, and we had the ability to trash documents. That was it. That was literally where we were about 12 months ago. Well, the good news is we've come a long way. So in less than 12 months, this is a small subset of the functionality that we've made available through our API. So we now do things like folder management. We let you set account-level permissions. We have metadata that you can query over. You have an export servlet where you can download documents in a variety of different formats. So you can download your presentations in Excel, for example, or in ODS. We have an advanced query model around who, what, when, where, really the ability to kind of manipulate the data and get the information that you really want. We have the ability for you to actually edit documents right there in the cloud through the append service. And we have a couple of new announcements that we're going to make today around extending functionality around things like revision history and others, which we'll get to. We're not going to cover all of these today. This is just kind of a subset, again, of the type of functionality that we've released in the last 12 months. We wanted to give you an impression of kind of the direction that we're going. Now, today's session's around cloud applications. And what we really wanted to talk about is how organizations and how users are building applications that use the Google Cloud service as a platform, as a file system in the cloud, as a database in the cloud, the ability for you to actually create a Google document or a Google spreadsheet and use that as your database for building really interesting, rich applications. And the ability to, as an enterprise, be able to get access to that data, manipulate that data, and manage it in an intelligent and intuitive way. So we talked to enterprises before doing this session, and we came up with 5 particular use cases that we wanted to talk about today. The first is migration. So how do I get my information into the cloud? And then, of course, how do I get it back out of the cloud? And how do I handle different revisions as different people are manipulating the same documents? How do I make sure I'm getting the right access to the right revision? Sync. This is obviously a very important problem that we need to be able to address in terms of how do I make sure that the information that I have locally on my machines or in my local network servers are up to date with the information that I have living in the cloud. Querying. So how do I get access to this information? How do I find information that meets a particular criteria? Sharing. This is obviously the big Google Docs kind of prime benefit in terms of being able to take any piece of information and share it and collaborate it and edit in real time. So how do I take advantage of that? How do I work with different people within the organization? How do I interoperate across different applications? And for any lawyers in the crowd, legal discovery. Basically, how do I manage situations where perhaps as an individual I can get access to my information, but as an organization I need to be able to get access to information for all of my users. So if I'm being perhaps in a legal case or I'm being sued by an organization, I need to find all documents or spreadsheets or presentations or PDF within my organization that meet a certain criteria. And this is a really interesting use case of two-legged OAuth, which we're going to talk about, which will really let you almost impersonate the user to gather information and data. So these are the 5 use cases that we're going to talk about in detail today. Again, nice balance across demonstrations as well as some code samples. But what I'd like to do is I'd actually like to kick off with a couple of really cool partner demonstrations. And the first one is from Sandosh, who I'm going to invite to come up here to the stage and give us a nice presentation on a tool that he's developed called gDocsBar.
Good afternoon, everyone. First, I'd like to thank Anil and Eric for inviting me. It's good to be here. And I'd also like to thank Manu for collaborating with me on this project. So let's get to the demo. The idea behind the tool was to shrink this UI into a simple and yet powerful interface to kind of use Google Documents in a better way. So it's a form of a Firefox extension. It's a sidebar. There it is. So you could actually perform most of the functions that you do on docs.google.com using this tool. You could filter the documents by various parameters: owned, open, starred, private, hidden. You could also filter it by document types: document, presentation, spreadsheet, PDF. And like Anil mentioned, the few use cases that enterprise users required or asked for was to migrate, how to get documents inside and how to get documents outside. So I'd like to demonstrate how do we get documents into Google Documents. You could start writing a new document, or you could do a new presentation or a spreadsheet. Let me go ahead and do a new document. And you could also upload documents, say. And they're immediately available here. You could also drag and drop to the sidebar and automatically uploads for you. You could also do a search. You could search documents by, let's say, test. This is actually search for the contents of any documents. Unfortunately, it's not found. So you could also do a query by title. You can do an exact. I don't know. Let's do there it is. And how do we get documents out of docs.google.com? You could do an export, say save as RTF, Word, or PDF. And it's also document type specific. So if you go to Excel, you could save it as PDF, CSV, or tab separated data. And then you could start it or unstart it from right from gDocsBar. You could also browse folders, say and you can rename a document. you could also do a move to folders. And let's say you're working on some project and you want to download that, various documents of the project in just one click. You could do that. You could do a search for documents that part of the project, or you could go to folders, do a select all, and download. So that's it. That's a short demo of gDocsBar, and thanks again.
Great. Thank you, Sandosh. The next partner demonstration that we're going to do, I'm going to invite Ondrej from Syncplicity to please join me up here. Sync is always something that our customers are asking for us, and I think Ondrej and the Syncplicity team have a great solution, and I encourage them to tell us about it today.
Thank you, Anil.
Thanks, Ondrej.
That was a great demo, Sandosh. I've been using the gDocsBar for a couple of days now, and it's working great. Hello, everyone. I'm Ondrej. I work for Syncplicity, where I'm responsible for product and API design and development. Syncplicity is a startup based here in San Francisco looking for ways to make it incredibly easy for people to share and access their data. And the basic premise behind Syncplicity is that our folders and files should always be accessible to us and to those we share those files and folders with without even having to think about it. And what we have done at Syncplicity is built a file synchronization platform that's exposed as a web service and works together with our lightweight desktop application to keep your and your coworkers' computers in sync. However, we've also realized that it's no longer enough to just have the latest copies of your documents and photos instantly synchronized to every computer. After all, that's not where you always need those documents anymore. These days, it's web applications like Google Docs that we've come to increasingly rely on and where we need our data just as much, if not more. Currently, Syncplicity synchronizes hundreds of thousands of documents between our users' desktops and their Google Docs accounts. Some use us for two-way backup. Some use us to take the opportunity to explore the online world of Google Docs. But perhaps most interestingly, many use us to help bridge the divide between the Microsoft Word devotees and the Google Docs enthusiasts by letting both camps use the tool they prefer the most. With Syncplicity, companies no longer need to choose between one or the other. They can have both, and they can have Syncplicity take care of all the complexities on the back end. Complexities like revision control, conflict resolution, and multi-machine synchronization. So imagine Rachel, a marketing manager who works for Syncplicity and works on documents. On the documents that we publish to our website and documents that we published together with our service. Rachel knows Microsoft Word very well and enjoys working with it. At the same time, however, she needs to share her documents with other people. In this case, she needs to share those documents with Isaac, our CTO and a longtime Google Docs user. Isaac uses Google Docs exclusively, and he'd love to see all of the documents he needs to interact with right there in one place. So here's what they would do. So I'll pretend to be Rachel for a few minutes. Rachel keeps all of her documents right here on her desktop in a folder called Marketing. The folder is under Syncplicity's control, and there are 2 documents in it. Rachel also recently created a Google Docs account that has a few stock documents inside of it. In order to keep the marketing folder and her Google Docs account in sync, Rachel needs to link her Syncplicity account to her Google Docs account. So let's do that right now. So Rachel will log into Syncplicity. She'll click on the Applications tab, and she will associate her Google Docs account with her Syncplicity account. She'll grant access to Syncplicity to her Google Docs account, and she'll pick the folder that she wants to synchronize between her computer and her Google Docs account. In this case, it is the marketing folder that I had mentioned previously. At this point, Syncplicity has recognized the link between her Syncplicity account and Google Docs and begun synchronizing the 2 together. What this means is that all of the documents that she has in Google Docs will sync right down to her PC, and all the documents on her PC will sync right back to Google Docs. Perhaps most importantly, those two places will now be kept in sync, always and all the time. Any changes she makes in either place will be immediately reflected on the other side. When Syncplicity is all done, it lets the user know, in this case, displayed a little balloon pop-up at the bottom, and the two stock documents that we saw in Google Docs have magically appeared right on her computer. Here they are. Let's now go back to her Google Docs account and refresh. And the two documents that she had on her PC are now in her Google Docs account, and you can see that they were uploaded right about now. The document that she'd like to share with Isaac and get feedback from on is called Syncplicity FAQ. So let's go ahead and share the document with Isaac. Okay, let's log out of Rachel's account and log back into Isaac's account. And hopefully the document that Rachel shared with him is right here. Let's go ahead and open it. And there it is. You can see that there's actually a typo in the document. No problem, we can correct that. So I'm going to close the document. And now, being Rachel, I'm going to go back to my PC where I'm spending most of my time on and open the Syncplicity FAQ document in Word. Give Word a few minutes to load up. It's connecting to the printer. And here it is. So I'm going to go ahead and make the change. I'll change questions to questions as soon as Office lets me in. What Syncplicity is going to do as soon as I make the change and hit save is synchronize the document right back to Rachel's Syncplicity account. As soon as it gets there, it's going to be versioned and backed up. A few moments later, it will then be synced right back to Google Docs. And if Office let me in, there we go. I think I can finally edit it. Slowly, but surely. And I'll save the document, and I close it. At this point, like I had mentioned before, the document is being synced to the cloud, first through Syncplicity, and then right to Google Docs. So let's go back to Google Docs. In Isaac's account again, I'll refresh and open the document again. You can see that the document is now correctly spelled, and everything looks great. So that's what Syncplicity does. This is one of the many things that we do. Our website is at www.syncplicity.com. Take a look at us. The whole Syncplicity team will be available after the talk in case you have any questions. And that's it for me. Thanks so much.
All right, hey everybody. So let's dive in some code. So the protocol, I think a number of you have probably used, we have 14 or 15, 16 Google Data APIs at this point. The Analytics API and the Maps Data API are some of the newer ones that we just launched within the month. But the protocol itself is fairly straightforward. We're just going to cover the basics as a crash course. For those that are familiar, this will be quick. For those that aren't, you're going to get a lot of information here. So it's HTTP. It's REST-based. It's the full CRUD model. You can read data. You can also write data. It extends the Atom publishing protocol, so it's just Atom XML. These are common protocols. If you're familiar with them, you can pick up one of these APIs and then use the same code, same similar code across multiple APIs. And so what we do a little differently is we extend the protocol by having authentication. So that's important because you don't have to roll your own. You can use auth-sub, you can use client login or OAuth, which is an open standard for authorizing access on the web. We extend the data model. Here's my nifty laser pointer. It doesn't work. No, you can't see it. Extended data model, so last modified by in the case of Google Docs. You can see who's modified and when they've modified the document. We do batch operations, so you can wrap up a bunch of requests into one single feed, and then the server will process that and spit back a response for you, so you can save some overhead there. And then lastly, you can request responses from the server in different formats. So you don't have to use Atom XML if you're not comfortable with it. I certainly don't like XML myself. So you can do JSON or JSON script and provide a callback function if you're in a JavaScript environment. And so that image, I think, pretty much explains it all. We have the cloud, we have the APIs, we can make mashups, we can do contacts, calendar, docs, we can do a multimedia app with Picasa and YouTube. So the possibilities are really endless. So under the hood, what does this sort of look like? We're just making get, puts, deletes, requests to the server. In this case, we're requesting the user's list of documents. This is an authenticated request. You see that authorization header there. It's got an auth sub token. We saw that sort of process when in the Syncplicity demo. So what you get back, you get a 200 OK, and you get a bunch of XML. At its rawest form, you have a feed, and then you have a bunch of entries, each entry being a document. And there's a bunch of metadata there. We'll take a look at that in a sec. So if you don't want to use XML, if you don't want to use HTTP, you don't have to. I wouldn't choose to do that. So we do offer a number of client libraries, and there's sample applications available so you can get up and running very quickly. And they just provide a higher level API. They handle some of the complexities of the token management and making the raw calls, and there's a lot of great helper functions there. There's also a JavaScript client library that's not up there, and that's a both read and write client that it uses its own cross-domain communication. So the first enterprise scenario that Anil mentioned was migration. And so this is important when you're going to want to sync your local client to the cloud, right? And then you're going to be able to get those documents back out, those files back out. And so the Documents List API, as Anil mentioned, provides document creation. You saw that also in the gDocsBar demo. You can create documents. You can create folders, so you can preserve the folder hierarchy between the two clients, between the online version and the offline version. So just a simple example here, we're making a post request to that same documents list URL. It's authorized, we're providing the auth sub token there, and then we're just creating a simple Atom entry and creating a category that's a folder of a type folder, and then calling it example folder. So if all goes well, that folder should be created within our documents list. Uploading content is a little more involved, right? Because you're creating a document at the same time you're actually putting content into the document. So this is a MIME multi-part request. So it's the same process as before. It's an authenticated call, same feed URI, but instead of just creating that example document, we're actually appending Microsoft Word content there. And instead of using the folder category, we're using a document category. So fairly straightforward, same process. Again, the client libraries handle all this for you, so I encourage you to check them out. I'm actually going to skip this demo. In the interest of time, we have a lot to cover. But you saw some of this export functionality in the gDocsBar sample. This is actually contributed by a third-party developer on one of our forums. It's open source. It uses our .NET client library. Do check it out. And basically what it does, it just allows you to back up your entire Google Docs to your local machine. And you can specify what type of export format you choose for each different type, whether it's document, presentation, spreadsheet. So how is that done? We have an export servlet that's relatively new, so you could always put your files up in the cloud, but you can never really get them out unless you're viewing them in Google Docs or exporting them manually. So now you can do that programmatically. And so the documents and presentations each have their own export servlet, and then the spreadsheets also has its own. And all you really do is reference the type of document and then the ID of the document and the format you want to export in. And as you can see there, we have a number of different formats ranging from the open Office formats to the Microsoft formats and zip, text, what have you. So sync. Sync is a hard one. Syncplicity's done a great job. You saw some of that, and maybe you can ask them how they did it after this. But you can imagine setting up some kind of cron job or whatnot to back up your local machine every night. And just as a simple example, using a Python client library, that's 5 lines of code, not including that import statement there. So we're setting up a doc service. With any of the client libraries, you're going to typically set up a service object. You're going to pass it your application's name. You're going to do some kind of authentication if needed. In this case, your documents are all private, so you're going to need to authenticate. And then you just reference a media source. Maybe it's an Apache log that you're uploading to your Google Docs every night, the content type, and just call one of the helper functions, upload document. So it's literally that easy in 5 or 6 lines of code here to back up all your docs. And in this case, we're just printing the document that was uploaded, its title, and then the alternate link, which is the link to Google Docs, so you can open that up in a web browser. So we have a more advanced query model than we used to. We support the Google Data standard Google Data standard query model, which is Q for full text search. You can search by title, by author, by the updated timestamps, and start index is used for pagination. But we also have some other stuff that's specific to Google Docs. Here's a few examples. I hope you can see them. The first one, let me just query all my documents updated within this minimum time frame, and then order them by title, so you can do some kind of syncing that way, query the documents, maybe store them locally, and then make modifications, re-upload them to the cloud. You can use category, sorry, I guess you can sort of see this now. So you can use category queries, right? Give me all my documents or spreadsheets, and also the documents or spreadsheets that the user has not viewed. So you can see maybe you upload an HR packet or something to your users using two-legged OAuth, as we'll see in a second, and see if they've actually viewed the thing. So give me all my PDFs that I own, and they're also shared with the domain. So if you're on a Google Apps domain, you can do some special queries there. You can query on folders. You can query on writers. Give me the results in JSON, so you don't have to use XML. So you can do a bunch of different stuff. Once your data is in Google Docs, you can use the API to pretty much get it out anytime you want. So at its basic level, here's what you get. You get a list of entries in a feed, and with a bunch of metadata for each type of document. So let's take a closer look at that. So we have special categories, right? We talked about that view category. So this particular document has been viewed by the user because there's a viewed category. We know what type it is. It's a document. There's a document category there. We know if it's in a folder or not. In this case, it's in a folder named child folder. We have the common set of Google Data links. The alternate link is the one that we mentioned that points to Google Docs. You can open that up in a web browser. We have the self link that references this particular entry. And then we have the edit links, which you can actually use to modify the content. So the edit link being the one that you use to modify metadata, such as the title. And the edit media is the one you use to update content. Lastly, we have sort of a section of special attributes for the Google Docs API. We have a particular resource ID. You can use that for the export service that we talked about. Who's modified the last document, when it was last viewed, these two here. And there's this other one here, writers can invite. So you can, this is analogous to the Google Docs. When you share a document as a collaborator, you can prevent them from sharing it with further collaborators. And so you can prevent that actually using the API now by setting this either to true or false. This last one here is the feed link to the ACL feed, and we'll talk about sharing in a bit. Before that, we're going to see a really cool demo. So the DocList Manager was intended as a sample application. It's written in Ruby on Rails. It provides all the Rails AJAX goodness. And it uses a colleague's utility library. It's all open source. Those two URLs there. And it demonstrates some of the things we talked about. We saw in gDocsBar and Syncplicity. We have category queries. We can use the export feed. It's also a mashup between contacts and spreadsheets and documents. So let's pop over there. Before I do that, I just want to, if you haven't seen Google Code Samples, I highly recommend it. It's got all of our library samples and all the sources on the side there. You can run these. These are all live samples. So do check it out. And the DocList Manager is indeed there. So the first thing I need to do is authorize this website. And we'll do that using AuthSub in the same fashion you saw in the previous demo. The user chooses which account. Looks like I've been logged out. So the user presented, with the list of scopes, the list of APIs that we'll be accessing, so we know exactly what this application is going to do. We'll grant access because I do trust it. So we come back to the page, and you see I just did an immediate query for my list of documents that I own. So I have just 2, unfortunately. But we can do the same for spreadsheets. We can drill down in folders, seeing the folder structure of our documents list. And so this sort of shows you that you can use the API. It's very verbose, so you can literally rewrite the Google Docs UI if you want. And so just clicking on one of these, I'm presenting that metadata we just took a look at, the doc ID, the title, last updated and whatnot. This preview image here is actually just using the export feed. We're just exporting as a PNG file and just presenting that to the user. You can also choose to export this document. It's not as interesting as a TXT file, but you can see it did work. Here's the alternate link that'll take us to Google Docs if I choose. I did mention this is a mashup with context, so it's getting a little cramped there, but what I did here is I just queried the user's the sharing permissions for this particular document, and so I can actually add user 1 here as a writer. So he's there. So just a great example. I think this took me probably a week or something. Not very much time at all. And using the API's functionality, you really can accomplish a lot. So we talked about, Neil mentioned that we'd focus mainly on the documents list API, but we wouldn't be building applications in the cloud if we didn't see some other ones. The context API we just saw spreadsheets and whatnot. So spreadsheets actually today, they have office hours from 2 to 3. I highly recommend going. They're actually rolling out some new APIs today that you can check out and learn from them. It's going to make it more, if anybody's familiar with the Spreadsheets API, it's going to make it more feel like SQL. It's got a better query model. And of course, you can use the Spreadsheets Gadgets API. For those that are familiar, you can visualize your data within spreadsheets, creating a gadget, which is really cool. So check that out, 2 to 3 today in the Google Data office hours. The 4th use case was sharing in ACLs. This is the big selling point of Google Docs, right? You can collaborate in the cloud. We just saw in the last sample that you can add users using the API. So let's explain sort of how that's done. There's that feed link, which is on every document. It's the list of sharing permissions, and if you just query that, what you'll get is a list of the different users that have been added to that document. So what you can do, you can add, same thing you can do in Google Docs, right? You can add owners, you can add writers, collaborators, as they're called, readers. If you're on a Google Apps domain, you can add everyone to that domain. You can share that document across the domain. There's batch support supported in this, so if you're adding 25 users, from a Google I/O event that you just met and you want to share this document, you don't have to do that one by one. You can save yourself a little bit of bandwidth there. And lastly, there's that writers can invite flag that you can set, so you can prevent even further sharing of that document. Maybe you don't want the collaborator, you want the collaborator to edit the document, but not necessarily share that with someone else. And just as a tip, you can actually, instead of querying the documents list feed, you can use different projection, which is expand ACL, and that'll actually inline the ACL feed with inside of the documents list. So you get all of that information that we looked at in the documents list feed, but you also get the ACL information as well. So that'll save you a little overhead. It might be information overkill, but just a tip. So at the very bare bones level here, this is what it looks like. It's just another Atom entry if we're doing a get to that ACL feed. The 2 important ones here are the ACL role, right, and the ACL scope. So you know what type what type it is. So it's a user in this case, a reader at example.com, and she has been set to be a reader on this document. Of course, a writer would be a writer, and an owner would be an owner. And so you can imagine using this, looping through these different ACL entries for some kind of discovery. So you can discover documents that maybe have been shared outside of your Google Apps domain. Maybe they've been shared with otherguys.com. So you can quickly find documents that you don't want shared outside of your company. I'm going to turn it back over to Anil, who's going to talk about two-legged OAuth and discovery.
Great. Thanks, Eric.
Yep.
So one of the great things that you get with the GData APIs for free is two-legged OAuth. And basically, this allows you to, as I described earlier, effectively impersonate the user. So imagine a scenario in your organization where you have a legal case where the organization is going to court over a situation where you now need to go and find out who within your organization has ever talked about the company ABC. Now, you can get every single one of your users to go through and do a query and find the information, then pass it to you. Or with two-legged OAuth, you can actually go in as the enterprise admin with the consumer secret key and be able to actually go through every one of those things just as an administrator. And it requires no user intervention. It doesn't require the users to actually give that permission. It allows you just to go in there and get that information. And there's a number of different things that you can do with it. As we described, I mean, you can do it to modify the actual user permissions across documents. If someone has gone ahead and shared a document that's confidential outside the domain and you need to pull that back, you have the ability to go in there and be able to change those permissions, be able to see who's looked at a particular document, be able to actually add and update company contacts, set calendar reminders, upload documents into different people's accounts for induction. There's a number of use cases where two-legged OAuth comes into play. One of the ones that we often get asked about on the enterprise side has to do with legal discovery. And as an example, we built a App Engine application here where very quickly and simply using the Google Documents List API, you actually have the ability to pull up an advanced query model where you can come in and you can type in a series of criteria that you want to refine your search based on, including things like exact title search or containing the words, how it's being shared, whether it's private, where it's shared outside the domain, who it's shared with, who the collaborators are, the dates associated with that query, and then, of course, who particularly owns that query. So you'll see I'll run this query here. This is just off a sample domain that we've created for the purposes of this demonstration. And what that's going to do is it's actually going to go through and it's going to look at this individual, this custodian, spambox at meviews.com, and it's going to go in and try to find all documents that meet that person's criteria. Sorry, I don't think I pressed that button. And what will happen is it'll actually appear here with the information saying that I've requested it. Here's the information. Here's the documents that are returned. If I show the query of the details of the query, you can see that I can enter in some information here. It returned 7 documents. Here's another query I ran earlier where I actually looked for the query for the keyword awesome, and it returned 1 document. And it actually returned me a zip file, which I can just open up, and you can see what it's done is it's actually exported all these documents into a zip file. This is something that we plan to release within the API very shortly, the ability to export a zip, so you can get a number of different files, zip them up, and return them all in a single query. So that'll come out shortly, and you can see that basically it just pulls up all of the associated documents that met that query requirement. So just a really quick way to use two-legged OAuth to actually go in and impersonate any number of users. And just to kind of look at how that was done, the Java, this was done built using App Engine and the Java client specifically, and you can see it's literally 10 lines of code. I mean, effectively, we go in and instantiate a class of the OAuth. We set the domain, we set the secret key, we put in the information across who the user is that we're looking to actually impersonate, and we run a request. And you'll see this particular request is quite simple. It just goes off and gets the feed of all the documents for this particular user and goes in and does a print line across all of the titles. But it's another very simple way of using two-legged OAuth to be able to go in and get information. So that export to zip functionality will be coming out soon, as well as information around revision histories that we talked about a little bit earlier. Now, we talked about a lot of things today, and I want to end with a really quick demonstration before we jump into questions. There are a number of enterprise use cases that we looked at in terms of being able to use the Document List API, the Spreadsheets API, the Contacts API, using them together to be able to use it as a platform for building cloud applications. And one example of that that's kind of interesting and exciting is this company by the name of OffiSync. And effectively what they've done is to help with the interoperability side of things is built an application that actually loads directly within Microsoft Office and allows you to interoperate with the cloud. So just as a quick example here, I can pull up PowerPoint, and you'll see here that I have this ribbon. So I have my normal Office 2007 information, but I've got this ribbon here at the top for OffiSync. And what I can do is I can click this open button, and it'll pull up my cloud information. So this is going directly into my Google Docs account to be able to pull in that information. I can search by presentations, documents, spreadsheets. I can do queries of information to be able to find things that match a particular type of document that I'm looking for. And what this is actually going to do now as I open this document is it's going to go out to the Google Docs cloud, it's going to grab that document, it's going to convert it, and it's going to bring it down locally on my machine. And now I'm living right here in PowerPoint with a Google document. I can hit this Save button, I can make changes, I can hit Save, it's going to go right back up into the cloud, and now for those people within the organization that are using Google Docs, they have the ability to get access to it directly within the Docs interface. We talked about search, and the other one that I just wanted to quickly show is that I can collaborate on this. So I can really quickly say, here's a document. Even though I'm in PowerPoint, I can say that I want to share this, to me. Whether or not I want to give myself read or write access, I can hit Save. Apparently I don't exist. That's right. Oh, yes, thank you. Get rid of that. We'll hit Save, and we will skip the sending of the email. And basically what that's going to do is it'll go up to the cloud, it'll change that document collaboration information, and it'll provide me with share access and write access. So it's just a nice another example of ways in which you can actually use the API to interoperate across applications. So here, someone using Microsoft Office can really easily and really quickly interoperate with someone using Google Docs, all within their own native applications. So we've talked about quite a few things today, and I guess the most important message here is, now probably the big question is, all right, great, where do I get resources, where do I get information to be able to learn more?
I'm glad you asked that question, Neil. So as always, we have a list of, a bunch of resources. There's the Documents List API documentation there. There's information on two-legged OAuth if you're a Google Apps Premier or EDU user. We have code samples, just numerous code samples in different languages to get you started. And there's a developer forum if you do get stuck, so do ask around in there. So I think for anyone that asks questions in Google Moderator, there's a link if you want to ask some last-minute questions. Also, feel free to come to mic so we can hear you on camera.
We have partners here as well,
we
so
have
if you have
partners
questions for gDocsBar or for
absolutely.
Syncplicity, please go ahead. We'll bring up the moderator
We know
page.
it's lunchtime, so thank you for coming to our presentation. So lonely.
Any questions?
We'll also be available up here if you want to just ask us directly.
I had a quick question.
Sure.
For the Syncplicity
Sure.
guy. What, how
come
does your tool handle images or HTML pages?
It's embedded in documents will sync together with the document.
I'm just talking about like straight pictures thrown into the sync folder.
I see. They will not sync to Google Docs. Not today.
But will they sync to other users that have that Syncplicity software?
That's exactly right.
Okay.
So the Syncplicity syncs across all your computers, computers of the people you're sharing with, as well as Google Docs and Facebook, for example.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
Ondrej, do you want to come up on stage just in case? And you too, Sandosh?
Hi.
Great session, by the way.
Thank you.
Is it possible to use the let's say the Google spreadsheet or Google Docs? Let's take the example of spreadsheet in such a way that we, from within our application, launch the spreadsheet, have the user edit it, and then suck the data back in from the spreadsheet as the user hits save. How would we go about doing that?
I can answer
Do you want to
that.
address that?
So right now, the only way you can actually upload content using the API is it's a wholesale upload. So it's not little chunks, it's the whole document. So what you would do is you probably export the document. If I have your question straight, you would export the document in question. You'd make a local change or something, and then just re-upload the whole thing to the cloud. So the syncing there is not great, unfortunately, but that's something that's highly requested from our users.
I'm sorry, I probably didn't make it clear. So the question was that we allow the user to edit or create a spreadsheet within the Google Docs and just extract the data out of those tables and rows into the system, into a different third-party system altogether?
So that would be, so the Google Docs API is used to create and manage your documents, including spreadsheets. But if you want to actually get that content in the spreadsheets, you use the Spreadsheets API. Yeah, definitely go to their session at 2. They'll have all the answers for you. Yeah.
You had a demo of an application. You said it took you about a week to put it together. It was kind of an interesting thing. I guess what struck me was, or what I was curious about was how far up the learning curve of the actual API were you at that point? Were you already such a super expert that 1 week for you is a year and 1 week for me? Or?
This is the Ruby on Rails one. The
DocList
I forget exactly which.
So I think the thing that took me the longest there was obviously the CSS and AJAX goodness, right? Just to make it look all fancy and pretty. But having said that, we do have the client libraries. And we have pretty great documentation on how to do just about everything in the API. So you should be able to get up and running fairly quickly. We talked a little bit about the protocol and sort of the underlying what's going on, but you really don't need to look at any of that if you're not interested in it. I would say a great place is to start off on the documentation link, and you could have a full-fledged app going in a week. Definitely, you don't have to be a guru at all.
One question, you guys mentioned revision earlier. What about deleted documents in OAuth? How our legal team's constantly asking, hey, this guy deleted this document, had this sensitive information in it, how do I retrieve it? So
sure.
Do tools like Postini, are you guys going to extend that to where we can access that information through OAuth and things like that?
So to answer your first question, deleting docs is absolutely possible today. We just didn't cover it. You can create, update, and delete docs using two-legged OAuth. So you can, if, say, a user creates a document or, shares it outside the domain, you just want to nuke that, you absolutely can.
Yeah. And then on the Postini side, certainly the vision around Postini is to be able to provide that archiving and be able to have litigation holds and give the visibility and the flexibility for enterprises to be able to protect that data. So yeah, certainly our goal as an organization is to find ways to be able to extrapolate that across docs, across sites, across email, and so forth.
Now, I heard of a couple third-party guys that had, written apps against all that. They've kind of mirrored the functionality with Postini. Mm-hmm. Are you guys going to, on the roadmap, do you guys know about when you're thinking about integrating that just into the enterprise-level clients?
It's difficult to say from a roadmap perspective whether or not that's going to happen through an integration with third-party partners, whether that's something that we're going to develop ourselves or work with enterprises. But definitely it's something that's on our radar, is something that we need to resolve, and we'll have a solution to market as soon as we can get kind of the best possible thing together.
Thank you.
We'll do the moderator question. So this is probably why everyone's sticking around. Is Google going to release a G drive, and is this API going to support it? The short answer is that I can't say. The longer answer is, at the end of the day, Google's mission is to organize the world's information, right, and make it universally accessible. We recognize that information is beyond documents, spreadsheets, presentations. So certainly, we're working towards finding ways to make it easy for organizations to be able to share files of all types, pictures, videos, documents, spreadsheets, zip files, etc. What form that's going to come in, all we're going to have to do is be able to say, stay tuned. But certainly, definitely the information, definitely the vision and the roadmap and the plan for Google is to be able to provide enterprises and consumers with a way to be able to share and sync that information. I think that's it for questions. So thank you all again very much for joining us today. Please enjoy the lunch.
It's office hours later today, so do check it out if you're interested.